won a contest writing a Cheers, and I got to sit through the rehearsals and all at the bar, at Cheers, and Jim, oh God, whoever is one of the creators, and Jim Burrows, I think James Burrows. He said, "I can't wait to read your script and all that stuff. And if it's good, we can use it." And midway through the week, they canceled Cheers.
This is Coop's Comedy Corner. Buckle up because it's funny as Coop's Comedy Corner.
Welcome to Coop's Comedy Corner. I'm your host, Steve Cooper. I got to tell you something, people. Back when I was living in LA, I lived in Burbank, and there was on Magnolia Boulevard, there was a place called Monte Carlo Deli. It was right next to Pinocchio's restaurant. And I remember I saw Jay Leno outside. It was a street festival. I saw Jay Leno, and I went up to him, and I said, "Hey, Jay," I said, "I used to perform at the Comedy Works in Philly. I know you played there." And he went to me, "Oh, yeah, that Jimmy Cayune's place above the Middle Eastern restaurant. Yeah, Jimmy Cayune." And I couldn't believe he remembered that. And the Comedy Works was back in the day, was an amazing club. And the owner and founder and one of the original stand-up comics, you could say, in Philadelphia is my guest, and it's Steve Young. How you doing, Steve?
I'm fine, Steve. How are you? And I remember, I can picture you standing against the wall right where the entrance was to the club itself. And sorry to say this, it was at a time when hair was involved, and you were an extremely attractive man, and I kind of wish I was gay, but I wasn't at that time. And I just remember you there, and I thought you of that level of comic coming through. It was sort of different eras. Judy Tom Wilson and the Meyer and Young and those guys, and Mike Egan, and then there was Wid and Kosher and all that stuff. And I thought you were one of the up and comers, and then I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I went on the road for a long time. I remember working, it's funny. I started doing comedy. My first open mic was at the Outlet. And then, of course, I came to the Works. And I would do that. And Kevin Kearney, your manager, would always give me a late number because open mic, he would rag through people. Like CFO, you'd pull it out of the hat. But then I started doing this nerd character called Steve the Stud. And Kevin bumped me up the list. And I asked him, like a few months later, why? And he goes, because it meant you were trying to be creative. And I think that's what was great about the Philly comedy scene. It was always a creative outlet. And there was two clubs, and they were different. I mean, the Works was, you had the Lenos, you had the Risers, you had the Wendy Liebmans. The Outlet, you had like the Tim Allens, the Dice Clay. So it was sort of like, one was like in the Works, the Outlet was in the alley. The Works was above a restaurant. And it's just funny. I always wonder, how did you ever, we'll get to how you started the club, but how did you ever find like the Middle East restaurant? Because it was, if you walk by, you wouldn't think it's a comedy club. And it was like 3 stories. And there was like a belly dancing on the bottom. But how did you find that place to put comedy in there?
I can't remember exactly, but I did know that they had, there was a show going on in that room, and I went up, and it was like 3 people in the audience, and I looked at it and went, man, this could be a great club. And I just went to Tayun and started talking about it, and he said, come on in. And so it was basically me. I was looking for places, and for the Outlet, for Comedy Spotlight, the group we were, and I found that. I came back. I said, "This is a great place." And the first night we opened up, thinking, "Oh, we'll have a few people there." We had hardly anybody working, like the door, seating, and all. And the line was way out the door. It was so packed, and from that point on, it was that packed for like about 10 years.
Now, what was your path into comedy? Because, you started Spotlight. I think you guys started at the Jailhouse or whatever. Yep. I'm not sure. But when did you know you wanted to do comedy? And when you look around and there's no clubs, I mean, it must be very frustrating. Like with me, I'm like, oh, I got the outlet, I got the works, we got Gone Bananas, we got Scarpati. I mean, I started in '88 or '89. There was a ton of clubs, so you knew you could get work. But what was it? First of all, why did you get into comedy? I mean, and what made you start it in Philly?
Okay. Why I got into comedy? Well, the same reason most people, because you love it. And I remember falling asleep every night on the Johnny Carson show. First, after his monologue, 15 minutes was that he did the monologue, and then the first guest on was always a stand-up comedian. And I didn't make it much past that, but I would live and die with if a comic was bombing, I had to turn it off. I mean, I felt it. And my mother had just the album. I was talking, she's 99. I was talking to her yesterday about, all the albums and some of them that I wasn't allowed to listen to, like Belle Barth. But she had Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks and all the Bob Newharts and I can't think of them right now, but I was a little older then, but Carlin and all the guys that you kind of fell in love with, and you could listen to those albums over and over and over. So Carson, and then of course I would watch Merv Griffin for, he would let a lot of the young comedians on. And I think I was 19 when I remember my mother driving me into Trenton. I remember the spot that we were paying the toll. It was 5 cents at that time. And we were paying the toll. And I said to my mother, and I think I was 19, I think I want to be a comedian. And she said, that's $1 million to 1 shot, which of course is the kind of support you really want from your mom. And I always say to people, she should have said, but you could be that one. Now, my mother loved comedy. And, so, I mean, it wasn't that she didn't like it, but who was going to be a comedian, a comedian, a star, anything like that from Levittown? And so it was really a matter of, that's kind of something that probably won't happen. Went to New York and what was the club, the famous club that Woody Allen worked in?
The Village? No, the Village Gate? No.
I worked the Village Gate. I actually opened for Oscar Brand, a folk singer, way back then. And across the street where all the, the
bottom
name,
end, the bottom end, the bottom
not the
end,
bottom line, not the bottom line, bitter end.
Okay.
The bitter end. I worked the Gaslight, which I met Uncle Dirty there for the first time. He was actually emceeing, and I was auditioning, and he said, if you told me you were a comedian, I just would have put you on the show anyway, because everybody was playing the guitar. They were all hootenanny nights. And then I went out to LA when I was about 21, and there really were no comedy clubs. You stood in line at the music clubs on the nights that they would have open stage nights. And the Improv at that time, remember, it wasn't the Improv. It was the same room, but it was mostly folk singers and all that stuff. And I remember auditioning, and I finished auditioning, and they said, this is the big question. Who do you want to win, North Vietnam or South Vietnam? And I said, I mean, South Vietnam, isn't that? I was so political. What, isn't that who we're for? He said, well, when you get your mind together, come on back. And so that was it there. And then I got married and had some kids, stuck to the marriage, and came back and worked regular jobs. And then when I ended up back in Philly in my late 20s, that's when this started. So
did you find, like, it's not like now, like the internet, you can just put posts up, like, we need comics. Like, how did you go, you guys, because it was you, I think it was Clay Heary, Ken Lynch, Grover Silcox, were they all in it? So, I mean, Will Neary was, I don't know if Will Neary.
Yeah, Will was there. Yeah.
So how did you guys all find each other? I mean, and because I know you ended up at the jailhouse, but Tommy Moore was involved too, I think. But,
absolutely.
So how did you guys, like, find this? Back then, it'll be like
they found it. I saw something in, I don't know, ad, and I went there one night, and they put me on, and I became a regular, and I think how Clay put it when they interviewed him when we were not the best buddies. And he said, well, how was Steve Young? He said, well, some people get on stage and they kind of look like they belong on stage. And Steve kind of looked like he belonged up there. That was what he said. We just gathered at the jailhouse.
You guys just started hanging out at the jailhouse. So how did it start getting heat? That's always wondered. Like it's like, you think about people call themselves entrepreneurs now, and you guys were entrepreneurs back then because you started a business, and both you and Clay ended up having successful businesses.
Yeah.
But how did you start? Like, I always think about back then advertising. Like, how was word of mouth? I mean, even like when I came to the clubs, you had all in the living arts section, every comedy club listed in the acts, and then the little skew in the Daily News. But how did you guys start promoting it? Because back then people were probably like, what, a bunch of people doing comedy at the jailhouse? I mean, what was the jailhouse like? Was it just like a college bar? Because I don't remember it.
Yeah, the jailhouse was sort of a side room to Kavanaugh's restaurant. It was a big U of P restaurant, and we were a very long. If you stood on stage, there was one table in front of you. Otherwise, you had to look to your right, look to your left, to see anybody in there. And I don't know how many we fit in there. I don't know, 50, 60. I don't know, but we would, push whoever was the not Clark the Leon. And there was a guy from the Inquirer that we would constantly go to the newspapers and say, here's who we have, et cetera, and they would write us up, Stu Bykowski, because we were the comedy guys in town. So we were one facet of, I guess the other one was the Bijou, but of course they had more names come up, and rock and roll. So we just did legwork, and that's how we got the attention. And then later on, they had that living arts. I would put whoever was going to be there, et cetera. And Andy Scarpati realized that it went in alphabetical order. So anybody act he had, whether it was an opener or a headliner, whoever was who had the earliest in the alphabet name, he would put that first. So one weekend, I said, starring Aaron Aardvark, and had that as the first act, who was never existed. But yeah, you know what? It was like we were all playing. It was silly fun, and we were getting to go on stage to do stand-up. And every week we did something different. We try something out. One week I would come in as the mass nightclub comedian, and another night I would come up as the mask insurance salesman, and everybody would just try different things. And I thought that's what you're supposed to be doing, as opposed to coming in and just doing. And keep in mind, we only had like one night a week to do this, but every so often, like Barney Weiss set up a room for a night. Ken Lynch set up a room for a night. It's closed right now on Fountain, not Fountain, on Fairmont. The Liberty restaurant. Okay, whatever it was, and we were there once a week too, and that's where we sort of had our open stage to find people. But at this point in time, we were still all local. It was only us. I remember calling Bill Murray the first year of SNL to try to have him come down, and I just called up. I said, "Could I talk to Bill Murray?" And they, and he just said, he said, "That's really nice, but I don't do stand up, and I don't have stand up." And I didn't know if you'd like to come. He says, "Okay, so what's Philly like? How's the comedy stuff?" And he started this long talk. He was such a nice guy. But at that point in time, people, and every so often somebody would come down. But for the most part, it wasn't until we split. Well, we opened up what was the Comedy Factory outlet, and then it split, became the Comedy Works, and then Clay had.
Now, the outlet was the first location in Bank Street. I mean, when did you decide to just open up a bigger place? I mean, was it something that you said, we we can make money? I mean, what made you decide to do that? Or was it just the love
Yeah.
of bringing stand-up to the city?
Well, keep in mind, we're only charging $1 to get in to the jailhouse. So this room that sat close to 300 people, and actually at the end, it was 325 people. It's that with the balconies. And that's what I said. We opened up with the first out-of-towner we had was Joe Bolster. And it was like our A-list guys who were the ones, Meyer and Young, Grover, and Clay, and there were a couple other that were back there, but that was our first. Judy Toll, and then Tom Wilson came in. Those were, and Ralph Harris. Those were our sort of first guys that came in. But every week we would have somebody from New York or LA. And it was back at a time where, I could just call them, Jay Leno, Seinfeld, Eddie Murphy, Jim Carrey, Reiser, Larry Miller, Mark Schiff, the guys that were sort of the headliners in New York, and we were paying real money. So we could get Gilbert Gottfried to come in, even though he rarely left New York. And the thing is that because of the way the club was set up, a big club, lots of people, really wanting to have fun, the comics had to be good. I'm talking about the Philly comics had to hone their acts to become really, it wasn't like these open mics they have all over the place where you do 5 minutes. We had legitimate packed audiences who paid money to get in, and everybody was getting really good. And when the New York people came in and the LA people, that was very competitive. They there, but at the same time, they thought Ben Curlin. Yeah, Ben Curlin was there too. But they would come in and they'd have to in effect, compete with us because it wasn't like they were the stars in terms of performance. When I had Eddie Murphy in, I had to middle him.
Was that at the Works, or was that the club before the Works?
Oh, this was the Works. The club before it, which we ran for about 2 months, we did use outside people. I said Joe Bolster was the first one who came in. I forget who we used during that time period, but it was probably like Bolster and Rich Scheidner, and Scheidner when he had Y in his name, and Carol Leifer and Steve Middleman and those guys. And, and then when we split, which was about August or September, I don't know, Clay did what he did and I did what I did. Clay opened up the Comedy Factory outlet in that alley. It was a different setup than mine. And, we could have 2-3 guys from outside the club. As I said, like Dennis Miller came in, but he wasn't good enough to headline. I had Jeff Cesario would headline whenever he came in. Some of these names, and we have back then, there were so many really terrific comics that at that point, nobody really knew. But they did great shows. People would come back to the club, not necessarily to see a particular comedian, but the club became the draw because the comedians were so good. Bob Nelson must have played there 100 times.
Now, I want to ask you, what happened between you and Clay? Was it you were young guys? I'm sure were comics. And I always say, when you're a performer, you're part narcissistic, you're part insecure. So you always have those two things. But you guys were both, you both went on to have great clubs, and you helped so many comics because we could go across the street and you could watch comics at the outlet, then you could run across the street in the Works, and you could watch a Tim Allen and go see a Paul Reiser. But what happened with you guys? Was it just a matter of egos got in the way, or you wanted to go different ways? And it's just amazing that you had to split, but you both did well.
Yeah, I'm going to cut this short. Okay. If you sat down and had a beer with me, well, you'd have the beer and I'll give you all the details. But for the most part, what it was is I was the manager. I found the club. I was the manager. I got a percentage. I would put the shows together and I'd run the club. Well, when it became so successful, they decided that maybe it's not a good idea for one of the comedians running the club. And they voted me out as the club manager. This was a whole conspiratorial thing and all. And but what they didn't count on was that Tayoon only worked with one person, me, and their contract was over, and they didn't realize it. And with Tayoon, and so Tayoon said, "I only know Steve, so I'm going with Steve." And they went out and did, got their own. And there was animosity on that whole thing, but Buddy ended up really doing well and having lots of opportunities.
Well, it's funny because you guys also, I mean, you were doing the 4 shows on 2 on Friday and 2 on Saturday, and then you were doing the open mic, I believe, was on Wednesday, and you had a Best of Philadelphia on Thursday. And I try to tell people that the open mics back then, they got a crowd. Like, it wasn't like and comics back there didn't give a shit if you ran to another show because we were all working on our acts, and because there was a crowd there. Now, like in LA, people were like, "Oh, you have to hang out for all 10 of us." That person who has 7 minutes says, "I'm the headliner because I'm last." But it was such a great scene, and but it was funny because the open mic. I mean, was it just because comedy was so hot that we had people coming up at open mic?
Oh, well, there are 2 things working. First of all, everybody was working on their act, and I forgot Wayne Cotter, of course. Wayne, Judy, and Tom, Egan would all come on Wednesday. So you not only had 25 open stagers, but you also had regulars who were performing. Plus, I would pay, it was $25 or $35, whatever, 2 people from New York to come in to have an audition. So I would basically pay their train fare. And so people would come in to audition for the club from outside the club, but at least I paid their expenses. And they would, for the most part, come in on Wednesday night. And then as the years went on, you did certain promotions so that you could get companies to come in on the nights. Mostly we would try to push it on Thursday, because Thursday it was a combination of the newer guys who were developing and doing pretty good, as well as the guys who are the weekend guys too. And we ended up with really good shows. Sam Arif was great in putting things together. Kevin Kearney, and who else? There was one other guy.
Kaplan?
No, Kaplan wasn't part of it. Kaplan was just down in at Georgine's.
Jimmy Little and Joy Little.
Right. Yeah. They worked at the Comedy Works when we started opening up other places. Like when I did resorts, I did resorts. They did the club in Philly. My girlfriend at the time, Libby Jacobs, she ran part of it. We opened up at Georgine's, and that was Jim and for the most part at Night Joy. And then we did Wildwood, and when we did Wildwood, Wayne Vogel, who was like my best friend at the time, and he managed down there. So it really depends. When we were having a number of different places. Now here's the thing: I don't even remember the question you asked.
It's all right. We were talking about how the club opened, but I'm going to tell you one thing about your club is I remember I was hosting an open mic there you weren't there. I think you were in LA. I think you were going to LA, and it was Kevin and me were sitting there, and Stephen Wright walks in. I guess Stephen Wright was dating someone, a ballerina from Philadelphia. So he comes in and he's so modest, and he walks up to me and Kevin, because we're just sitting there, because where you're like, there's the office upstairs, and you would stand outside when the other comedians were on. And when you're hosting, you run back in because you didn't. And he just walked in and was like, "Could I go on?" And we were like, "Holy shit!" Like Stephen Wright. And it was. I can imagine these people are in Philadelphia watching an open mic, and then Stephen Wright walks on, and that's what was cool about it, because people would do stop-ins if they're in the area because they knew they could get stage time.
Robin Williams stopped in and did more stage time than we wanted. But people would come in and perform. Stephen Wright did the first Carson, where he blew Carson away. He was so good. Carson wanted to book him the very next week. He had no bookings for that weekend. His agent called me up and said, Steve just did great on tonight's show. We need to put him someplace. Well, that weekend I had Wid, Wayne Cotter, Professor Urban Corey, and I think Kevin Sullivan. Whatever it was, that was the show. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll let him do 10 minutes. do 4 shows, 10 minutes each. By the way, 10 minutes of Stephen Wright is the perfect amount of Stephen Wright because it's just packed in there of just great jokes. But yeah, we had those opportunities to do things like that. And plus the guys that would roam, come in, Joe Frazier would come in and Julia Serving, we were in a way kind of a hot spot, but people, this was people who would just come in and stop in. And actually was Joe, was it Frazier's kid? One of Frazier, I think Frazier's
I
kid.
hosted that night. I hosted a night. Marvis Frazier went on stage, and I was sitting there, and I remember it's just right after he got knocked out by Spitz,
Tyson.
by Tyson. And I started off bad because I think his grandmother's wearing this hat, and I said she was wearing an Esther Roll hat. I made a Good Times reference. And then after he got off stage, I said he lasted here longer than he did with Tyson. And Joe Frazier looked pissed. Marvis thought it was funny. But I remember that night because everyone was like, and what's funny is you're sitting there on stage and you could see. That's one thing about the work. So you had a huge stage and you were above but you could see the people up front. And you'd see, and you're like, holy shit, that's Joe Frazier. And growing up watching Frazier and Ali, I still remember that night. Marvis Frazier, he was not funny. He was
not funny at all. And he had a hard time ending his act too. That, he would go way longer than he should have gone. Yeah. Right.
Now, all the times that you were there and you watched a lot of shows, who were some acts that were like really your favorites? I mean, you had a great acts. I mean, we can, Ladman, I'm friends with Kathy, I'm friends with Wendy, and Scheider. They're all great acts. But who are some acts that really just stuck out to your sense of humor, your taste?
Okay, that actually showed up at the club. Bob Nelson, adored him. He would develop characters there. I said to Bob, anytime you want to come in, you can come in. And especially when we had the big stage, he would go in and out the doors and develop his gorilla act. Mac and Jamie were a killer team. And the only other team that was competitive with him was from Philadelphia, Bob Meyer and Bob Young, Meyer and Young. It's funny, Tom Wilson from Back to the Future, he was, the first time he went on, I gave him 5 minutes, and I don't know, in a month he was a headliner. He was so charming and people loved him, and he was solid material. And he ended up being terrific. Oh, so let me go back. Mac and Jamie, Stephen Wright, Leno killed. Jim Carrey was amazing. Bill Hicks. Out of that, I could pick 5. I love Professor Irwin Corey. I mean, that was to me like when I was a kid. He was an old timer. So yeah, those are basically it. I mean, my inspiration more like Albert Brooks and Woody Allen and Carlin and people like that.
But what's funny is for my group, like I was starting a little after Ralph Harrison, after Todd Glass. To me, that was always the epitome of the works acts for us, and Wid. That was a thing. It was like for my group, Todd was a little ahead, and it was just funny because they all went on to do great things. I mean, Ralph got a sitcom after he went to LA, and Todd, is just this underground comic who, people just love him now. But it must be funny because you saw them start off as like Todd was. Well,
the funny thing is, Harris worked the steps. And he kept saying, give me time. And I finally said, all right, I'll give you time. You have 60 seconds. I'm giving you 60 seconds, and it better be killer. And I want you to the MC will introduce you after they do their time. You only do 60 seconds. It's got to be great. It was great. And I said, the next time, 3 minutes. And the next time, 5. Todd was the very first customer we had at the club. He was 16 years old. He was at the front of the line. We sat him right up, I remember, corner of the stage at a table. He was alone, and it was over. He laughed at everything. Second show, front of the line, Todd Glass. And we sat him in the same place, and I'm thinking to myself, he just everybody's got the same material. He's going to have to laugh just as much. Next night, first person in line, Todd Glass. He said what he did. I find out later, and I mean, I used to manage him, manage WID and all that, but he would go back at school and do all our material, and he became extremely popular from doing that.
So,
but then when I first put Todd on the road, I gave him all my material. And then I won't mention names, but he went into one club, and whoever the headliner was there the week before, when Todd got on and did was there the next week, did his act, and the owner says to Todd, "Why are you doing so-and-so's act? That's his." And Todd said, "No, it isn't. That's Steve Young's. He gave it." And so Todd was learning real quick about who were the guys that you watched out with material, where you do material in front of material, but I'll never mention the name.
So you're in Philly, the club's going great. Now, then you decide to move to LA. When did you decide to move out to LA and start trying to get TV writing jobs, or what made you go to LA? I mean, you had all the connections because you knew all the comics. You booked all of them.
Right. Because I wanted to be a television writer. So I won a contest writing at Cheers, and I got to sit through the rehearsals and all at the bar, at Cheers, and Jim, whoever is one of the creators, and James Burrows, he said, "I can't wait to read your script and all that stuff. And if it's good, we can use it." And midway through the week, they canceled Cheers for the next year. Water everywhere, not a drop to drink. But I got an agent out of that.
So then, now, didn't you write for A Small World with Jeffrey Sherman? Did you work with Jeffrey Sherman?
No, I worked Boy Meets World.
Yeah, but didn't Jeffrey Sherman?
I don't know Jeffrey Sherman, or I forget who Jeffrey Sherman is, but
he's married to Wendy Lieben. So
oh, okay. Well, I don't know, but I did Boy Meets World, and in fact, next month I'm doing Pod Meets World. They're Danielle Fishel. They do about Boy Meets World, and so they want to talk about the shows that I wrote for them.
Now, what was it like? And a lot of comics have a hard time acclimating into a writing room because there's a bunch of guys with great sense of humors, because it is a very competitive business and people have to be funny. And all of a sudden, when you're used to being on stage and getting the laughs, but now you're in the room, and especially if you're the new guy, you're not getting the laughs. I mean, how did you acclimate to that? Because you also, when you owned the Comedy Works, you were in a position of power. You could help careers. You could break careers. You could say, "I want you to work for me. I don't want you." So now all of a sudden, you have producers who the tables have producers are saying to you, "Show me the funny, else you're out the door." How did you acclimate to that?
Well, it wasn't easy because they had like 10 people in that room the first time, and some weren't so hot and some were great. Some could pitch a whole dialogue, just off the top of their head, and it was perfect. Luckily, I knew some people there who were very supportive type people too, and that helped because some of them would go, "Steve just said this was pretty funny," and they put it in. And the executive producer was Bob Young. Bob Young, I used to manage when he was part of Meyer and Young. He treated me the same as everybody else, but it's still, and plus, I really could write well. Normally what you do when you pitch ideas and then you leave room for about 2 weeks to write a script. Well, I could write it in 2 days and write a really good first draft. So I think that's where I ended up being valuable, where I could put together something like 1 week. They weren't happy at all with the show, and I said, "I got a script here. Yeah, here's an extra script I was just playing with. Here, you can have this script." So, and that's good because you got paid not only your regular salary, but you got paid a lot of money for a script, and of course, whenever it would rerun. And I'm still getting checks from Boy Meets World.
Now, were you still doing stand-up at that time, or were you just concentrating on writing?
Mitzi Shore made me a regular at the Comedy Store, and the only reason she did, it was one night I went on and just the audience just, I blew them away in the original room, and Judy Toll sat with Mitzi Shore and basically held her head aimed at the stage because Mitzi would be talking with everybody and all, and she made me a regular. And the interesting thing, the first night, and she gave me great spots, and the first night I went on, I died. Nothing. Everything that worked before, nothing worked. And Dom Irera was at the back of the room. And Dom was one of the guys I did not, the first time he came to the club, I said, "You're not ready." I mean, he was a kid back then. And he wasn't. He was, at least to my way of thinking. I booked him later on, but he kind of held that grudge. And in fact, I heard that Philadelphia heard that I didn't do well because he went on to Bella and told everybody how bad I was. I think Kevin Gurney told me.
And DeBella was the MMR that was affiliated with the MMR with the comp CFO. So
right.
It was just funny because that's so Clay was on there.
Yep. But so, I did that for a while, and I have to say, at that point in time, so I'm writing television. I'm hoping to write movies, and I didn't want to hang out. You know, I mean, I was getting to. I had kids. Little kids, and you know, so there was that, and I was writing all day, and go, 9, 10 o'clock at night, and go out. It was just too much for me.
So what? And you ended up leaving LA. So what happened? Did you just get tired of the LA life, or I mean, because you had a successful career, and
yeah, they were. Everybody was offering me so much money and wanting me to run their shows. And I just said, no, who needs millions of dollars when I can go home and work as a door and window salesperson? Well, the idea was, it was the end. I had aged out. I basically started later in life. I was older than everybody else except for Ben and Barney. And the kids, I didn't want them growing up where I had to have, in LA, had to have binoculars on them. And it was, people weren't, banging down my door to write. So it was, I said, oh, well, I can make a living there. I can write movies. I don't have to be in LA. I have an agent, I can send this stuff to them. So I went back, and to tell you the truth, and that was pretty much, the end of my career. And that's when I, after a while, dove back into stand-up.
I said, it was a long time ago at the works, right? I just remember, because you weren't there a lot, because I think you were going back and forth, and I would host, so you would do guest sets. But I remember back then, you had a chicken and you had a guitar. Now, back then, did you do jokes about the chicken? Did you play the guitar? Or what was that? How was that in your act?
Yeah. I did a ventriloquist act with the chicken, but I didn't know how to do ventriloquism. So the only thing the chicken could say was, okay. And so I would just ask him questions that the answer had to be, okay. And I did all kinds of tricks. I won on the Gong Show. Chuck Barris put me on another show because he loved it so much. I thought, and Lenny Schultz wanted to buy it. But I said, I thought I will become a star with this chicken. I don't do the chicken anymore, but still people come up to me about and still remember that.
But, okay, that's why I want to get to your act. You did have a chicken on stage. I worked with you in Newtown because I went to Andy's room. I never really go to Pennsylvania, and I was just going to be opening for Joe Matarese at City Winery. So I wanted to get some stage time. And you closed at Newtown. I remember I forget the MC. It was a young woman. Jewish woman. I remember because she did jokes about that. Then it was me. Then it was Bill Chang, Coleman, and you. But you brought a guitar on stage. You never touched it. You brought a chicken on stage. You never touched it. I want to get to your act, and which I want to know, were they just something that people were anticipating you touch it, or why? What was it, like a mentally mind fuck with them, or what was that? Why did you do it?
I don't know why I had the I must have done the chicken act. And I did it at Andy's place in Doylestown time in 20 years. And it wasn't me. So it didn't work. But the guitar is one of those one joke with the guitar. And people can't believe that I haul that guitar all around but I love the joke. And so
Now, your act now, I'll be honest, it didn't bother me. Some people get a little ruffled because you're doing callbacks to their jokes, which for me, the hard thing about that is that means you have to sit in a room the whole time and watch on. You're taking notes and you're creating. And for me, I think it's funny. How peanut comics, some people are like, oh, they think, oh, is he trying to steal? No, he's not trying to steal your act because he did a completely different punchline. I forget what my joke was, but you added something like he drove here. I don't even remember. But how did you come up with that act? Because once again, I mean, it's innovative. I mean, it's something that Scheidner, Rich had put on Facebook. How it was, their callbacks and everything was really brilliant. And so when did you decide to start doing that? And do you worry like they're not going to work sometimes? Because I think all of us worry that if we go on stage and we eat shit, like if something doesn't work, we start like a crab on its turned over, But so when did you start to do that?
Well, there was a specific moment. I was at the Comedy Works at Georgine's, Kaplan's place, about 7 years ago. And you know how Kaplan gets on stage and does the announcements and they last like 10 minutes. He'll tell you what's going to be happening 4 years from now.
Yeah, he always there's a mashed potato buffet.
Yeah, and the same thing. What the buffet will be for Valentine's Day in 2 years, something like that. So I got up on stage and I went, if you people don't laugh, I'm going to do his announcements again. And I did his announcements again, but I exaggerated all over the place. And it was just off the top of my head. I didn't write them down or anything like that. I just came up with it. And somebody, I forget who it was, said, you ought to do that with a lot, other things, do movie reviews like that, do jokes like that. And so I tried it, and I don't know why, but it's the best I've ever been. And I don't know how I do it, because I sit there at the beginning and go, I'm not going to think of anything. And then all of a sudden, I'm just writing and writing and writing. I'm saying to my girlfriend all the time, what did he say? What did he say? Because, I'm missing because I'm doing the next joke. And I got to tell you, it always works because nobody's expecting it.
But the thing is, once again,
I do my act too, by the way.
Yeah, you do your act, but also you act it, but you have to sit there and constantly write. And also, you have to go up on stage and think of, one, I mean, because you're a mild-mannered guy, you have to worry about it. People might sit there and go, well, what's this guy? Is he making fun of the other act? Like, did you ever get that? Because
yeah.
I said, and I know some people get that, but I'm like, I don't care. I'm said, you know what? It's nothing like my joke. He's used who cares if you use a setup? You add something to it. And I get humor of it. But do you ever worry that the crowd might think, is this guy like making fun of that guy?
Well, first of all, I don't worry about that. I know there are comics who don't like that, and I've told the comic, hey, if you don't want me to do it, I'm not going to do it. I won't use your act. I don't care. I've got plenty of stuff to do. I understand. And then there's people that I just find out from, like Andy Scarpati will tell me so and so didn't like that. So I won't do it. They should come up to me and tell me not to do it. But I also say to everybody, because many of the times my jokes are better than their jokes. In fact, sometimes I take things they say that aren't jokes. They're just it might be a segue to get to something else. And I'll tell that, or something happened in the audience and I bring that in and I say to the comic, hey, take it. It's yours to begin with. So not that that's the reason, but I'm providing them with material too, if they want it. But I've also had people who said they didn't want me to do it and then come back to me a year or two later and said, yeah, I felt like really funny that night and I'm sorry, you could do whatever you want to do. But the audience, I do know at the very beginning, a lot of times I'll hear from the audience, he's doing the other person's act. You know, like somebody is there's an older couple trying to explain, you know, what is happening, but I get more the compliments that I did Catch a Rising Star that I tried to get in for years, and they wouldn't even respond to me. And I did it last week, and it was lovely, wonderful, sweet. I miss her so much. Anita Wise, who got me on there. I said, could you mention me? That night I was on the stage doing a guest spot, and then they booked me, and they love me now. Now they want to book me for other things too, because I don't. What I'm lucky about is nobody is doing that, and pretty much what is comedy but surprise. And I do think a lot of times I'm writing and I'm going, this is really going to kill. I know this is going to kill.
Now, at this point, do you find yourself freer on stage? Because I do. You know, I didn't perform. I would perform on and off out in LA. And I said, you know, I only perform every once in a while, and I have so much fun doing. Different back then, like when we had to audition for you, and we had to do a weekend at the Works, and it was like a boiler room because if you screwed up, holy shit! Because an MC back then, you could get 6 weekends a year at your place. And then I was lucky enough to work both there in the Outlet and Mitchell's. I got to work all those clubs. But if you screwed up, you're on that scrutiny that you would lose that big chunk. Now I don't care, and I have much more fun, and I think it's better. But for you, do you feel freer on stage? Because you've had a very long career. You've gone through, God, the ups and downs of the boom. You're in the beginning, and then it boomed, then it flattened, then it boomed. So how do you feel on stage now when you get on stage? Do you feel more free and you feel more creative?
First of all, it's my medication. Yeah. And I don't mean it's my medication. I do take medication. But the stage, being on stage is such a gift. I get to everything in terms of aches and pains and thoughts that are like you're running in a circle about your life and all that stuff. When I get up on stage, all gone, no pain, nothing. And I'm up there talking to myself going, this is so much fun. And you know, when the audience is with you, you become funnier. You know, you think of things on stage, you start to improvise, even whether you're an improviser or not, because you know, I haven't seen you for 100 years, and you were already different. When I saw you over at Andy's place, you were relaxed and just, you know, talking up there. It wasn't like what you said, you know, you're up there, I got to make sure this is perfect and all. And it's become, and I'm, you know, and I thank Andy Scarpati for, you know, basically reviving me. I don't know even if I was ever revived, but he revived me, and he books me more than anybody else as a headliner. And it's thrilled to hear, you know, people say nice things. And now I do other things. I write books, and I teach and all that stuff. But if I get a gig and it's a weekend gig and I'm playing someplace, top of the world.
No, you said you write books, and you'd mentioned, because I mentioned someone I interviewed, because I interview a lot of people, and you'd interview people for a book. What was the book you were interviewing people for?
It was called Great Failures of the Extremely Successful. And I interviewed very high profile, highly successful people about the traumas that they went through in their life. And it could be any time, you know, from being the kid, it could be life or death, it could be romance, it could be career. Betty White, Erin Brockovich, Tony Curtis, Ed Asner, Johnny Unitas, which was pretty cool. Teddy Pendergrass, which was cool. Teddy and I, we were trying together to do a movie about his life. And I got those moments, and there were a lot more people that were involved. Those moments were like, I was just like when you were asking about out in LA, I never lost being in awe. I could, when it was the show night, and I remember we had Betty White started on the show, Marie Osmond, Craig Ferguson, whoever that that woman from Frankenstein, from Mel Brooks' Frankenstein.
Terry Garr or Madeline Kahn?
No, the one who played the old lady. She
Cloris
was
Leachman.
Cloris Leachman. And in the audience with Carol Channing. And Carol Channing called me over because she knew I wrote the show, because they introduced me at the beginning, and she was telling me how funny it was. And she's talking to me, and all I'm thinking of was, she sounds just like Carol Channing. And I still have the signed script from all those people. And every time it was like, yeah, even like Jay Leno and all that, who played a lot for me, and other people, I still sat there and gone like, this is so neat. And I don't think I ever lost it, in terms of how I felt about the people. Even if I'm working with people now who I think is funny, like there's some people I never saw before. I never saw Jay Black until I came back. How is he great? Jonathan Burns, who I got actually his Hollywood agent after I saw him once at Andy's. And so the whole business that we've been in and out over those years is that for whatever reason and all, and I got to do what I met Mel Brooks. He treated me wonderfully. These are my idols, and so I got to do actually what I wanted to do.
I have one final question for you. Looking back on your career, what are the few things you're most proud of? I mean, I know you just said you got to meet all these people and you got to get to do what you want to do. But what do you look back and say, I'm really proud of?
Oh, well, there's a lot of things, and because it'll sound like hokey and all, but I'm proud of all my kids, all 300 of them. I travel a lot. Of the stand-up that I do today. I am proud of the books that I've written, some of them more than others. I've written for children's novels that I think a literary review said it was a cross between Captain Underpants and Kafka. And, those type of things are great. But a book right now on the need for compassion in the medical industry. I'm writing it with a surgeon. So, it's hard to say, but, my guess is you would ask people that, you might ask a lot of people that I have a hard time pinning it on anyone. And it was a show I wrote for HBO called Crash Box for kids who were little, and they would watch it and they would like it because it was educational and funny. So
that's awesome, man. I'm glad you got to come on. Now, this show will air in 2 weeks. Do you have any shows coming up you want to promote, maybe at the end of March or beginning of April?
Yeah, I'm going to be at the anniversary. Well, did you say the end of April?
End of March, beginning of April.
Yeah, I'm going to be in Doylestown for their 37th anniversary show. And that is April 5th.
Okay. Now, do you have a website?
The Larry David Code, thelarrydavidcode.com. My last book I wrote is The Larry David Code.
All right.
About me and Larry and what we went through. And then I take off into just ridiculous satire about the adventure me and Larry have.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on, Steve. It was weird. We were cutting back and forth. Anyway, people, go. If you see Steve Young's playing, go to that show. If you see him, headlining, you'll have fun. You'll enjoy it. It's a funny show. Also, I have April 9th. I'll be at Soundplex Studios with me and Paul Lyons. And April 26th, I'll be at Tony
That's another
Bruni's
one
down there on 73 Maple Shade. And I want to thank Jimmy Corham, from Comedy Trainwreck, who produces the show. Jimmy does a great job. He helps out a lot of comics in Philly. Ed McGonigal's got a show on his network. The Wid, who's with John Kensel, Coleman Green. There's a bunch of great people. So anyway, thank you for watching, people, or if you're listening, and have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.
Coops Coops Comedy Corner.